Oh, you say we're starting the educational portion, and this is one of those times where I'm like, it's been a month since we've done this, and then it was like a month before that because with Thanksgiving and the holidays and everything, it's like
Yeah,
we
the,
I've
the,
been
the holidays kind of fell on our day both times.
oh totally. Um, And so I've actually spent quite a bit of time trying to explore like what would I share. And so I'm hoping from our participants today that we get some really good Q&A going. I did get an email and I want to I'll keep it anonymous, and I did get permission and I'm going to share part of it. Because a lot of what I try and teach, there's a couple of things. I'm really big on teaching people that we need to understand our underlying needs. And understanding our underlying needs is really difficult. It's really, really hard because for so many years we have a sense that we're missing something. And when I mean so many years, potentially our whole lives, right? Until we have some type of an awakening. And that awakening can come through being caught by the police acting out sexually inappropriately with somebody or something or whatever. It can come through getting a DUI for, our first DUI or whatever. The awakening often can come in traumatic ways because it takes something external to awaken us. And so by the time we start to dig down and understand what our underlying needs are, there's so many layers covering it up. And a lot of people misunderstand. Cliche, but an alcoholic might say, I have a need for alcohol. No, you don't. You have a need to heal pain, and you're using something to numb because you don't want to feel the pain, right? You need comfort, you need connection. And so trying to get to a place where we understand those underlying needs is just so difficult and so painful. When you have a situation where you have let's say an addict, somebody who's struggling with addiction, almost said that wrong today. When you have somebody who's struggling with addiction and you have a betrayed partner, trying to get to a place to understand both of our needs is just super, the word I want to use is tenuous. I think that's an appropriate use of that word, but it's really tough because we're so caught up in addictive behavior. We're caught up in betrayal. We're caught up in trying to create connection and attachment. And so we misappropriate what our needs are, and we start to think that we have certain needs. So I love the need discovery process in recovery. Need discovery in recovery, that sounds like a lot of rhyming, is really I think it's fun. I think it's frustrating. I think it's painful. I think it's exciting. And we don't know what our needs are until we start to explore it. And then we teach people over time as we learn for ourselves more and more what our need is. And one of the things we do on this webinar, and I think you guys do an amazing job of asking questions, and I probably enjoy this more than anything, is the question engagement and exploring with you what those needs are, because I don't know. I'm just really good at helping people figure them out. And that's why I get paid. But anyway, I hope all the rambling. Basically, I got an email from somebody who had some really cool experiences with the webinar and finding some of the needs. And they said this. There was a webinar in which I had recommended a couple of books, potentially based on what I was seeing as unmet needs, and recommending Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, recommending No More Mr. Nice Guy. Again, that book only fits for a certain population of people, but I recommended those two, and it was said that they've come a long way, even though they recognize they have a ways to go. But they wanted to let me know that it was spot on, and how they've been able to explore kind of their emotional and their need maturity. And then they opened up and said, I had always made an assumption about acting out behavior, that it was X, Y, and Z, and that all of these things meant a certain thing. And this part really intrigued me. There was a certain assumption on a statement that the husband in this case had made, and we draw assumptions as to, and this is normal for all of us. If we hear somebody say something, we create a judgment as to what that must mean. And they created this judgment of what it must mean. And for a long period of time, move forward in the relationship, assuming that those judgments were correct. And what's sad is how much we miss because we don't understand how much our judgments get in the way. And ultimately, they explained that through reading and conversating, they've both been able to realize what was actually going on for the two of them, and that it's improved their relationship. And learning how to slow down and start to get curious with each other and understand each other, even if we're horrified by the other person's behavior. If we start to get to a place where we understand what needs they're trying to meet with that unhealthy behavior, we actually can really love and appreciate them. We can actually really connect to them, even if we find their behavior abhorrent, because we do find their behavior abhorrent. It's not okay. But connection is found in that understanding, and understanding the need, which again is super difficult, provides so much opportunity there. So little did I know, despite my rambling, I had close to 15 minutes, Scott. So I'm going to turn that over. I hope all that made sense. But the email was, I loved getting it because I was like, oh my gosh, this is some really good stuff around the two people who are willing to figure out and dig in and start to explore needs with each other. So there you go.
Yeah, and this is something that addicts and addicts in relationship, or people struggling with addiction, and their partners struggle with. But in particular, I mean, I'll speak as an addict. I discounted a lot. Excuse me, a lot of my needs. I was okay needing food, water, and I was okay needing shelter. But the other love that, and I think this is really common, or the other need, and I think this is really common for men, that gets painfully discounted, is the need for love and connection. And we will, because we have shame, deep inside usually, which we talked about on this webinar at various points, we shut down that need because we're afraid it won't be met. Do you see that with men, and do you see that with people struggling with addiction? And where does it come from? Is it all shame based? And what can we do to uncover that need in a healthy way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate of so many of these issues are shame based. The nuances of the type of shame we're feeling, whether it's internal shame, which I feel like I'm a bad person would be internal shame, or it's external shame, others think I'm a bad person. Either way, I'm not going to get my need met because I'm not worthy of it, or other people don't believe I'm worthy of it. And so I have to figure out how to get it met on my own, right? And there's variations of that, and everybody is unique. And I don't think it's limited to people struggling with addiction. I think there's a lot of betrayed partners that have learned, either because of the betrayed relationship or because of their own life history, that they aren't going to get their needs met, so they should be needless and wantless. And that's a survival technique, is if I don't have needs, then I can't get disappointed, I can't get hurt, I can't get betrayed. And you asked another question there and I didn't answer it. What did you ask me right there?
Um, does, oh, how did I word it? Well, I mean,
Oh,
oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to jump. Okay. And so you talked about men specifically, and when you and so when you talk about men and sexual addiction, like I personally believe, like culturally, and I think that there's a lot of work to undo this, but that has been being done. But I believe culturally, sadly, there's a lot of women who don't feel like, well, I'm not the sexual being, I'm not the sexual creature. Men are the ones who are sexual. And that's just a big load of trash. And
hooey, we'll call it hooey.
hooey, right? Because that's not true at all. I mean, there's in some ways it could be suggested that women are more sexual or have the ability to be more sexual than men. And I won't dive into it, but culturally, there's been that kind of thing. And I think I've talked about this before, that I had read somewhere that through research and whatnot, that a lot of men will say, I'm allowed to feel anger and I'm allowed to feel sexual. And those are the only feelings I'm allowed to feel, which is funny because sexual isn't a feeling. I mean, it's a physiological response. There can be emotions tied up in sexual, arousal and everything else. But and so there are a lot of men, unfortunately, that I see who tie their self-worth into sex, who tie their needs into sex. And so instead of, hey, I could really use some touch in and of itself becomes sexual. So they don't know how to separate the need for touch, or they don't know how to separate their needs for attention. And so their need for touch, their need for attention, their need for affection, their need for nurture, their need for self-worth, which can't be met by somebody else, all sorts of needs, their needs for adventure, all get tied up into sex, right? And people do that with alcohol too, right? They'll put all of their needs, their need for adventure, their need for affection, their need, and they can't separate alcohol from that, right? There's so many different ways that we take behaviors or substances or whatever. So I do think that part of this process is learning to go below and to figure out what those needs are. And I do think there are cultural issues going on there for sure. And I see more often men will tie their value and their worth to sex, and so much of their recovery is learning to separate those two. And it's so terribly difficult because sex is beautiful and amazing, and it can be, I always tell people, it is an incredible tool. I would even suggest sometimes one of the most amazing tools at expressing and connecting two people together. But you have to know, like, what is our connection based off of? If you don't have emotion in there, if you don't have trust and I'm trying to like go quickly through it, but I realize there's so much I could explain. Then sex is just this act of animalism. Like, I hate to even say it that way, but it's like that really doesn't meet a need at all. It just gives a momentary feeling of, oh, that was nice, right? Or it could anyway. And so sex is an amazing tool, but just like food is amazing, or can be, right? It can be a great tool, but do we understand the need that lies below it? And if we mix those two together, we're seeking after the tool and not the need. So I feel like I just went everywhere, and I'm handing it back to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, addiction or addictive behaviors are always a response to my unmet needs. I'm not getting my needs met. That's painful for me. So I numb out with alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever it is. Now, under my unmet needs, the reason I'm not getting my needs met is because I'm not asking. 99% of the time, I'm just not asking. And the reason I'm not asking is because I don't know what they are. The reason I don't know what they are is because I've ignored them for basically my entire life, because I learned really early in my life through childhood trauma and childhood wounding that other people, I can't trust them to meet my needs in a healthy way, or can't trust them to consistently meet my needs. Or, if I express my needs, when I was emotional as a kid, I was either ridiculed or told I was wrong. And so I shut up when I had emotions. And, that's because that's what I learned. And I find that most addicts, particularly male people struggling with addiction, we have a question about that in a minute.
No, and I actually am really excited for that question.
So
I've got some good commentary on that question when we get to it, but keep going.
Yeah. So I find that, it's this big long string of, action, reaction. And, sometimes the action is inaction, where not only do I not express my needs, I don't even explore them because I'm afraid to have them. And I see that a lot. And I can certainly identify with it myself. I'm afraid to have needs. And I'm afraid to express needs because they might not get met. And this is after 20 years of sobriety. I'm still afraid to have needs and express needs. So how can people get over that? How can we learn to identify our needs and not be afraid of them and express them? Because that's a huge part of recovery.
Oh, a massive part. How do we do that?
How much time do you have?
Well, my answer that people hate is I will literally just say slowly.
Yeah.
And that's the whole answer, right? Like it took us this long to have an awakening. We're not going to unravel that. I think the unraveling of it is, the truth is you can kind of look at it and go, at what point is it ever fully unraveled? I don't know that it ever is. It's just, I'm on the road of unraveling. And so just as it took me this long to have the awakening, it's going to take me a long time to unravel it and figure out how to get my needs met. If somebody says, I don't know how to express my needs, well, that's pretty normal if you didn't know what your needs were. And so you're going to practice, you're going to try. And then we're going to figure out, well, why? Where did you learn that you couldn't express yourself? And how do we work on that? So, which in and of itself, expressing yourself is a need. Feeling heard and understood would be a need relationally, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a kind of a cop-out answer. There's lots of ways. If I were to try and give somebody some tools, the tools might be reading good books that people recommend that have helped them understand themselves better, opening up to friends, family, trusted people, going to places where trusted people are. I don't recommend, for instance, if you want to go find people that you can open up to, the bar is probably not a good place because they are likely under the influence of a substance, which means that vulnerability and honesty to some degree is somewhat limited, if that makes sense, at least the ability to be vulnerable and connect. And so it's like, now I need to figure out, where do I find people who I can start to explore my needs with? So reading good books, talking about those books, talking to people. I personally think seeing a therapist can be highly effective. I've had people tell me that, man, my family member or I have been seeing this therapist for a year and it's really nice. And I have someone good to talk to, but I don't get much more out of it than that. And there are some people who I think need so badly to be heard that they'll see a therapist that hears them and listens to them. And maybe for the rest of their life, they're seeing that therapist. Me personally, I don't like that. Like, I don't want to be a therapist that somebody just feels heard and listened to. I want to teach them how to get that need met outside of my office so that they can fire me and move on with their life and I can work with somebody else, right? And so that little rant was all about the idea of, therapy can help, but make sure you find a therapist who can teach you how to get your needs met outside of the therapy office. So
go ahead.
no, lots of ways. Going to church, joining a self-help community, right? There's so many different ways to discover your needs. But go, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you mentioned therapy, because that's how it started for me. I got a therapist who could actually listen to me and hear me and not run screaming from the room. Which was a big deal for me because that's how much shame I was in. But I also knew I was paying that person to sit there and listen to me.
That is true.
Maybe chime in with, so it was easier. I mean, he was getting paid to listen to me.
Right.
I had to start small. I had to start with somebody that I was paying. And then we went to a group therapy where we were all paying him, but we were also listening to each other. Mm-hmm. And then it was 12-step meetings. I started to learn to open up to people in 12-step meetings who had the same problem as me. So it was easier. And then some other friends and family, and then, maybe a romantic partner. The romantic partner is always the scariest person.
Oh, it's terrifying.
And for somebody who's shame-based, opening up to the scariest person is the hardest person to open up to. And that sucks for betrayed partners because, or partners struggling with betrayal. We'll get to that question in a minute.
We're going to get there, Scott. We're going to get there.
We'll get there. But it stinks for someone who's the partner or the loved one of someone who's struggling with addiction, because they really want to be part of. I mean, they want us to be vulnerable. I've learned that the highest compliment I can give you or you can give me is to be vulnerable. I trust you with this important information that is maybe painful. I trust that you will still accept me and maybe try to help me instead of screaming at me or running away. But someone we truly, truly love and want to be with for the rest of our life is the scariest person. It's so hard. I had to work my way up the ladder. When we teach sex addicts about relationships, it's like, start with the plant. If the plant doesn't die, get a cat. If the cat doesn't die, think about dating. It's like we have to work our way up the ladder. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I don't know if you want to add to that or if we should jump into the questions.
I think they're great thoughts, and I'm on board with you. It takes time. It's slow, and the idea and the joke has always been start with a plant, then move on to a cat, right? And then maybe think about dating, right? And that really is kind of the joke, but there's a lot of truth there. It's discovering your needs starts slow. What's something that's dependent on me? A plant. And if that can survive, then can a cat survive, right? It's like the reality of it is that's how need fulfillment works. It's slow.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, your answer of slowly, the answer that everybody hates is really the answer, slowly. And one step at a time. And, you just have to learn to be vulnerable one tiny bit at a time. And I suggest doing it in supportive communities where, you're not going to be judged and you're not going to be ridiculed because everybody else has the same problem sometimes. I mean, I think that's part of why group therapy and 12-step work are so powerful, is we can be vulnerable without getting judged and put down and without our shame kicking in.
Absolutely. That's the idea of group work, right? And 12-step work is I'm going to be around people who are going to love me, even if I'm a mess. Yeah.
When I first went to 12-step recovery, somebody actually said, our job is to love you until you can love yourself. And I uttered some curse words under my breath and I thought I'm going to avoid that person at all costs. That person is now one of my best friends. But 20 plus years ago, I did not want to hear that because it freaked me out. I was so unlovable, I thought. Anyway, whatever. Okay, we're going to get to the question that Matt and I have been anticipating eagerly for many minutes. I noticed you made a point of saying someone struggling with addiction rather than using the label addict. Immediately following that, you use the term betrayed partner rather than someone struggling with betrayal. Do you think it's important to avoid these limiting labels on both sides of this issue?
Okay, so I'm going to throw this out here. I love the question, actually, but I
I do
will
too.
say what's intriguing is how much judgment, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, but how much judgment is in the last question. Do you feel it's important to avoid these limiting labels? Here's the interesting thing about it. Is it limiting? So the reason, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, because what this hits for me is the reality of it is, if we understand shame, shame is something that another person essentially, or shame is something that a person internalizes. So even if someone were to say to me, Matt, I hate your socks and your hair is awful. I might, it depends on who the person is, but no matter who it is, I might just chuckle and go, wow, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know, right? And I'm not going to internalize that as shame. And the healthier I am and the more secure I am, the less power that somebody else has to shame me, right? Or for me to take shame from what they're saying. Somebody could intentionally try and shame me, and that doesn't mean I have to internalize it. I can just go, wow, you're a really unhealthy, manipulative person that's trying to shame me for whatever reason, right? Well, for some reason that I probably can't explain, there are words that become shaming, or rather, words that become shame filled. And the tough part is, I think sometimes as a culture, we have to figure out, when do we transition from not using that word to using another word? And the hard part is that how many people, when they say I'm an addict, most people that say I'm an addict, what they're saying is, I understand that I have an addiction and that I have to work the rest of my life to not fall into an unhealthy space where that addiction ruins my life like it did before. They aren't shaming themselves by saying I'm an addict. They aren't shaming themselves by saying I'm struggling with an addiction. But I do think it's important for somebody who has an addiction to not let that label, if you will, or not let that word define who they are, right? The word disability at one time was describing a condition or a state of a person. But we have to, be careful. Can I say that that person has a disability or is disabled? Or what word is going to become shameful? And so, yeah, I do take a little bit more care to try and say, hey, there is no shame in struggling with an addiction. Just own it, work through it, find healing. I would say personally, I don't see any shame in the term betrayed partner. Does that mean that 10 years from now, somebody would watch this video and say, I can't believe that Matt Wheeler was using the term betrayed partner? That's so shameful. I mean, to be honest with you, I look at it and go, I don't love cancel culture because of that, right? We have to use words to express ourselves. And we kind of have to look, is there shame in the statement? Is there some shame in the term addict? Unfortunately, I think a lot of times it's used as a shameful term. And so I do try to be a little bit more careful. But the truth is, if I say addict, if that person doesn't interpret, or if that person knows my heart, they know that I don't have any shame there. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of to have an addiction. It's not like somebody woke up one morning and said, I really want to figure out how to be an addict and wreck my life and wreck the lives of other people around me. I don't think there's any shame with having a disability, whatever one you pick, right? Like, it's not like people necessarily chose it. So do I think it's important to avoid the limiting labels? What I think it's important to avoid is the shame that is underneath. And so if I could express my heart all the time to people and say, hey, I really am never intending to shame anybody. And so please, no matter what words I use, even if I'm ignorant, right? Please know that I mean no harm. Because I can tell you all sorts of ignorant things that I've said. And once I learned, I was like, oh, I'm not going to say that anymore because that hurts somebody else. But I also do think, man, at what point do I not take offense from the label and not take the shame on because I trust the heart of that other person? So I think it's really important as a people that we kind of work both sides of that. I'm not going to try to shame you, and you need to learn that that I need to learn that you need to learn that I'm not trying to shame you, and I need to try not to shame you, if that makes sense. Goes both directions. So I hope that actually explains that, but I actually really like that question.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very well stated, Matt. I mean, I use the term addict. I don't feel any shame when somebody uses that label and points it at me, and I don't ever mean to shame anybody when I use that term. Now when I first got into recovery, I liked to refer to myself as sexually compulsive because addict had a shaming connotation.
Sure.
At that point, it was 20 plus years ago. I think it's much less shaming now.
Yeah.
And I'm just much more comfortable with it. And, the more I know about addiction, the less ashamed I am to be an addict. I mean, to the point where I'm not ashamed to be an addict at all. I'm proud to be an addict in recovery. I might be ashamed to be an active addict with all the knowledge that I have at this point. But I'm proud of being an addict in recovery. I talk about it publicly. I write about it. I put my name on that stuff. So for me, it's not a shaming label at all. It's a label of strength as long as I'm in recovery.
Right. And really what you're saying you're proud of is the recovery work you've done.
Right.
Right. And you're labeling what type of recovery work you've done when you talk about the addiction.
Right.
And so, I do think words have to label, but we don't have to shame. And the interesting thing is the people who are most secure, I said this earlier, the people who are most secure don't get offended by a label. They laugh. They might use it as an opportunity to teach or correct, but they don't get offended. And I've said things to people that were ignorant, and they said, "Hey, yeah, I get where you're coming from. Can I teach you? Can I share something with you?" And I go, "Oh, well, wow. Thank you for being kind enough to help me understand. I can do it differently, or I can learn, instead of shaming me back or canceling me," if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't have any shame even about being an addict in the first place, because I understand what addiction is and where it comes from.
Right.
Something popped in the chat feature, addiction comes from trauma, right? And yeah, I mean, I had a lot of trauma, and I didn't have better options for coping at that point in my life. So I developed an addiction as a coping mechanism, and it saved my life until it ruined my life. I have no shame about that. Now, what I would have shame about is, with all the knowledge I currently have and all of the skills and coping skills I currently have, if I went back to active addiction, I would be very ashamed of that.
Well, there's a part of you that would be like, oh my gosh, everything I know, everything I've taught, like I've gone against everything I believe. Right. Yeah. Now, at the same time, I've seen that happen, and it's like, hey, dude, anytime, we're ready for you. Come on back.
Yeah. And I've gone out I've done the 12-step call. I'm sure you have too, where you go to somebody's house and say, I know what's going on. I'm here for you. Would you like to go to a meeting?
Yeah.
And once in a while, somebody will say, yeah, thank you for coming. And 90% of the time, in my experience, they say, no, but thank you for stopping by. Lovely to see you.
Right.
Because they don't want to. Anyway, whatever. Next question. We're just rambling today. Love it. We're back, baby.
I love it. I love the back and forth. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying it out there.
And by the way, your socks and your hair are fabulous. So just in case somebody ever tries to shame you, just know in your heart that those are fabulous.
I am secure enough. I'm fine with it. Even if I had to shave my head, because you look great too.
I'm very jealous of Matt's hair, just so everyone knows. D-Day was 19 June 2021. I passed a polygraph in November of 21 prior to my therapeutic full disclosure, which happened 2 days later. I passed that in the presence of my wife, her coach, and my counselor. Since then, my wife wants to ask me more questions about the FD issues.
Full disclosure.
Thank you. Full disclosure issues in an effort to heal from the betrayal trauma. Unfortunately, I often get angry with the questions she asks because I often don't have the answers to her questions. I want to help my wife heal, but how can I remain calm to help her stay safe? Do we need couples therapy? Great question.
Yeah, my quick response, do we need couples therapy? I mean, shoot, I feel like everybody could use couples therapy. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. I personally love the emotionally focused therapy, the EFT therapy. It resonates with me and with the couples I work with more than any other modality. But there are even other modalities out there that do a great job. And so ultimately, no matter what you choose and the type of couples therapist you choose, it really comes down to the work you guys are going to have to put into it. Do you need it? Probably. But going back to your other question, I want to help my wife. How can I remain calm to help her stay safe? So that's one question. And then the content of what you shared is actually another question. But let me answer, I'm going backwards here, but let me answer, how do you remain calm to help her feel safe? I love that question. And I think that one thing is becoming more familiar with why you're not staying calm. You did give some insight into, you said, I often get angry with the questions she asks because I don't have the answers to her questions. And I would encourage you to explore, what about not having the answer to her question makes you angry? Some people might be angry that they don't have the answer to the question because when they don't have an answer, they feel like they're failing her, or they feel like they've done something wrong. My challenge to you is you have to own whatever emotion or feeling or thought process you're attaching to her asking questions. If you don't know the answer, what would it be like for you to tell her, honey, that's a great question. I'm really sad that I don't know the answer because I think that because I want you to feel at peace. Here's my challenge to her and to all of us when we answer questions. Do we know what answer we're looking for? Do we ask a question, do we even know what need we're trying to meet underneath? What is going on for her that after a full disclosure and a past polygraph, and quite possibly what's going on for you that safety isn't happening in the relationship? I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming her. I'm asking questions because I'm curious, because sometimes I'm not providing the safety for my wife who's asking questions because I'm just getting angry and I'm not giving her space to ask the question. And I'm not saying, hey, that's a really good question. If I knew an answer, how do you think that would help you? I don't have an answer. I don't think I'll ever get an answer. Or, you know what? Great question. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to go talk to my therapist. I'm going to see if I can come up with an answer. I've seen people in recovery come to some epiphany that answers a question that their spouse has been asking for 6 years, and they take it to them and say, hey, I think I finally have an answer. And 2 years after that, they get another answer that is even better than the other one. These answers oftentimes are within us, and she's probably asking questions to try and understand herself better, thinking that you have the answer to help her feel better. Now, if it's a data question, and she's asking you a data question about the disclosure, there's the possibility that she just realized you didn't give all the data and she wants the data. But if she's asking questions about what something might have meant, or, what lured you to that person or thing or activity, then the truth is you may not have an answer to that because you haven't ever explored it. And maybe your therapist is saying, well, you're not ready to explore that question yet. That's going to bring up too much trauma or needs or whatever that we're not ready to tackle. We need to work on some other things. The simple question on remaining calm, I'll tell you, I love meditation work. Guided meditation often can help us learn how to stay calm when our emotions get escalated, but learning how to breathe, learning how to think and calm and in a way self-soothe in those moments, then going to her with your answer or your lack of answer. Learn that it's okay that you don't have an answer. It's not, I've had guys, men and women, make stuff up because they wanted to give their spouse an answer. And let me tell you, that's a disaster every time. That's just lying. Don't do it. And so the best answer you have, if you truly don't have an answer, is, I am so sorry, I don't have an answer for that. Tell me why you want that. Well, tell me why that you think that would help you. I'll be happy to think about it. I'll talk to my therapist. I'll talk to my buddies in recovery. Maybe I can come up with an answer for that. So hopefully this helps a little bit. Scott? You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to say I totally agree with you about, factual questions we should be able to answer. But it's what were you thinking? Why did you do that? What did it mean to you? Those questions we may not have an answer to, and those are typically not things that are covered in a disclosure. It's the factual stuff that's covered in a disclosure.
And don't get me wrong, those are all valid questions, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what were you thinking? What did that mean to you? What was the other one you gave?
What were you thinking? Why did you do it?
Why did you do it?
Yeah.
What did that mean? Right? All of those are wonderfully valid questions. And people spend a lot of time going to therapy to try and figure those out.
And I can tell you, in the heat of the moment, most addicts, such as myself, have no idea. We don't have answers to those questions. I mean, we're trying not to feel, we're trying not to think, we're trying not to look at the why.
Right.
We want to get out of our heads. That's what addiction is about. We get out of our heads. People say, well, you were so drunk last night, you were out of your head. Yeah, they were out of their head.
Yeah, that was the point, actually. And it doesn't mean that that's healthy by any means.
No, not at all.
So the factual questions, here's the other thing that's interesting. When people ask factual questions, like, how many times did you go drinking and get blackout drunk with your friends? Or how many times did you go to the strip club? Factual questions oftentimes with addiction aren't easy to answer. And so I always tell people, go slightly above what you think it is and say no more than, no more than 50 times. No more than, right? Because that way you're saying, I don't know the data on this, but I'm going to get you as close as I can. And to the best of my recollection at this moment, it's no more than this many.
Yeah.
Don't shoot low. You're way better off going to the peak of what you think it is, adding a few more, and then saying no more than this.
And just for betrayed partners, don't ask questions like, I want to know the name of every person you ever slept with. I don't know the name of every person I ever slept with. Trust me, I don't. Now, if I slept with your sister, trust me, I remember that specifically, and I can tell you.
Right. That would be data that is very important. Tell me the names of every person I know. Right, that I personally know that you've slept with. That might be a more appropriate question, but the name of everybody is not going to help. Right. But a good therapist will help you know which questions to ask and which questions to not ask.
Yeah, a good disclosure, the therapist will guide it and will make sure you ask answerable questions. But then the unanswerable questions will come up later, and it's frustrating for both of you. I mean, not being able to answer a question like that when I want to is really hard. And it was, yeah. So yeah, breath work, meditations, all that good stuff. Matt, can you explain the process of EFT, emotionally focused therapy, and how that works in the therapy setting, and why it works so well? Because it really is, I mean, your bio says it's the gold standard. Your bio's not lying. It truly is the gold standard.
Oh, it's amazing. The hardest thing is, I almost feel like it's so much easier to understand than it is to actually practice, right? And if I were to try and simplify it as much as possible, emotionally focused therapy, couples therapy, is about understanding how our negative cycles, our negative interactions work. And so I will actually tell my couples that you are going to often leave my office feeling like you're fighting, because I am actually taking them into a negative cycle, or rather, they're taking me into their negative cycle. And then what I do is I slow it down so much. I mean, I have spent an entire session or multiple sessions on half a second of time that occurred for the couple, trying to understand what was going on for both of them in that exact moment. And once we explore what is happening emotionally for the other person and they feel heard and understood, only then do we have the opportunity for them to now hear and understand us. So it's this mutual understanding, which is where we find connection. We understand each other. I don't have to agree with you. I don't have to I never excuse your behavior, but you make sense to me why you do what you do. I make sense to you why I do what I do. And then we start to work together to change those patterns of behavior together so that we feel more connected to each other as we progress in life. So it's a tough thing, because in my relationship with another person, I'm bringing all of my emotional issues, all my baggage, they're bringing all their baggage, and we react to each other instantaneously. We have these reactions. And so emotionally focused couples therapy is learning how to slow down those reactions so that I don't let my instinctual reaction take over, and I can stay present not only with my partner, but stay present with myself. And when you really see it done, a lot of times you don't notice how incredible the connection is. But when you see where somebody normally has gone and they learn how to slow down, how to take what they might perceive as an attack, how they can learn not to go to a defensive place, it's amazing to watch. So I almost feel inadequate trying to explain it. But that's, I mean, if you have more questions about it, I might be able to explain more, but it's slowing down our emotional reaction, connecting, and then working together to find ways of meeting each other's needs. So does that make sense?
Yeah, like, so if I come into your office with my partner and I come in, and my partner says, I want to know why he slept with no more than 50 people, because I said no more than 50, or whatever. That question, which I can't answer, to play off the preceding question here, is it sets us off on this sort of foxtrot, this dysfunctional foxtrot, where we know all the steps and we go through and we just boom, 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 boom. We have the whole fight, every single time.
Correct. And so the first thing that I would do is say, hey, that's a really good question, because the question in and of itself is fascinating, but this is where I have to get curious. And oftentimes a partner isn't able to get curious. because it feels like an attack. Why are you asking me that? I don't have an answer for that. And
Feels
so
like
as
you're
a
lunging at me in the first step of the dance or something. Yeah,
absolutely. And as a clinician, I'm like, hey, let's talk about why that question is so important to you. Right. And I might sit down and explore it. And they might say, well, me personally, and I'm just going to make this up. I was taught that I was never going to be sexual before with somebody until I got married, and so we got married, um, and then I find out years later you did all of these things, and so then I'll start to explain. Well, help me understand why saving yourself sexually, however you want to say that, for marriage was like, what did that mean to you, and why was that so important, and what might be the judgment that's coming out here for your sexually compulsive partner, right? Like, and I want to like pull that apart. And again, unless I'm sitting with the couple, I can't tell you exactly where I'd go, but this just kind of feels like the direction I would probably head. I'd want to pull that apart, slow it down. What is that question really asking for the partner? Right? Because they might be asking their partner, tell me your reasons why, but it's built with this whole foundation of their own personal beliefs around sex and sexuality and saving sex for marriage and their religious
trauma
beliefs.
and that's being activated, all that stuff.
Oh my gosh. And so I'll try and pull that apart and slow it down, in part so that the person hearing the question who thinks it's an attack realizes this is a partner who's saying, I'm hurting and I need you. And if I could understand you, maybe I wouldn't hurt so much. Maybe I wouldn't feel like here I was trying to save this very sacred and special sexual experience for you, and you never saved it for me. And that means you didn't love me, or you didn't think I was valuable, or whatever reasons they could possibly come up with. And I'm trying to slow it down so that in part that person can go, oh, that question really isn't about me, but I care about you so much that I want to try to answer that. And my answer might be because I didn't understand how sacred how important that was for you, and how sacred the sexual experience was in your moral beliefs around how we were going to act them out. Or, I mean, there's a million different possibilities of what that answer could look like, but you're going to try and lean in to the person asking the question to touch those pieces that are hurting.
Yeah, and I mean, we sort of parse every step in the dance in this way, and I mean, really get underneath it so we understand what's going on and the emotions that each of us is really feeling and why we're, So yeah, I mean, I love that. I want to get to this very last question that's asked. It's not really a question, but I think it is. My sex addicted husband's affair partner, they only met 4 times, is bad mouthing me and stalking me on social media. She is also telling his old co-workers that I was the one who was cheating. I'm so mad. Her husband thinks she is the best wife ever. I often want to tell her husband what a crummy person she is. I've been managing. I did a little edit there. I've been managing, but it's really hard not to have this resentment. What do you do when you're stuck in this situation? I mean, you haven't done anything wrong and you're getting badmouthed by somebody who did do something wrong.
Oh gosh. There's a line from I think it was from Batman, and it was Alfred. And I've always loved this line. Some people just want to see the world burn. And it's hard because obviously I don't know either of the people that are being discussed here. But when I look at a situation where you have this affair partner who is now bad mouthing you, there's a part of me that says, man, you can't fight crazy, because you're never willing to go to the depths that they are. And so this is one of those that I look at and think it feels unfair because it's a whole nother level of like betrayal and above and beyond the affair that already occurred, right? And so now it's like, hey, it's almost like, really? Could you have not found somebody completely crazy to have an affair with, right? Which, again, it's not like we think clearly and pick healthy people to have affairs with. That doesn't happen, right? Unhealthy people have affairs with unhealthy people. And it just so turns out that if this one is doing that, I would say this person has some real issues and I hope they find help. However, for you, yeah, it's hard to not have resentment. It's hard to not have your resentment towards your husband who cheated. It's hard to not have resentment towards this woman who's really being unhealthy and crazy. And unfortunately, unhealthy people don't have affairs. And so it's really coming out how unhealthy they are. And I would encourage you to, find peace and recognize you can't control the behaviors of other people, especially somebody you don't even know, basically. And you have to let it go. And that process is so much easier said by me than it is done by somebody who's feeling this. But learning to let go is a slow process. And I'm sorry, because that's a terrible place for you to be. But I encourage you to work on practicing letting go of that which is out of your control. You'll never be able to manage that.
Yeah. Some people are 50 different kinds of crazy and we can't stop them from doing it. My advice is do not try to play the game.
Oh, well, yeah, that
No.
you aren't crazy enough to actually be able to play the game. Like,
and if you try to play the game, you're going to look crazy.
Right.
And particularly on social media, which is forever people's sorry, it just doesn't go away.
No, and I mean, I look at it and I go, you don't have the firepower to be as nuts as that other person, because the fact that you're on here looking for help shows that you're a good person doing the best you can to get better. And if you want to try and play that game, you're going to wake up one day going, wow, I'm now them.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, because somebody popped in the chat feature. They basically got a really similar situation. This happens more than I think we like to.
Oh, sadly it does.
Or acknowledge, and yeah, yuck. So yeah, okay. We're out of time. Everybody, thank you. Matt, thank you. It's good to be back. We will be back here again on the 28th. And we will see you all then, we hope. Bring your questions with you. And yeah.
Hey, good job, everyone. I am very proud of all of you. Let's do this. Let's keep at it. So I look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks. And there is hope. Let's keep going.
See you all. Have a great weekend.